Hey guys, a redacted copy of the probable cause affidavit for Richard Allen for the Delphi murders was released today. Now remember, it's not a guilt beyond reasonable doubt affidavit, it's a probable cause affidavit. And I think it met those standards, and I'm glad it's out there. I'm uncertain from what was released exactly what in that probable cause affidavit, from what I've seen of it, would have compromised the investigation from being released earlier. It really doesn't add up to me. Other than maybe they hoped if someone else was involved that they thought the police had more in this affidavit. But what I saw was essentially limited to Richard Allen and really didn't suggest anyone else's involvement, unless there's something I didn't see. But what I did want to talk about was the evidence generally, and more specifically, what was the non-smoking gun piece of evidence. So first, of course, everybody knows that Richard Allen told the police, hey, I was on the bridge that day around that time. And then there are other witnesses who described a male who ended up matching the description of the person who ended up on the video that the girls took. And the police believe that Allen was the only person there and that he owned clothes like that. And so that was him based on where his car was and other testimony of other witnesses. That's just suggestive though, right? That doesn't prove it's him. Now, some new information, or at least to me, was the police revealed that on the girls' video, that as the man approached, one of the girls said gun, which means obviously she thought somebody had a gun. So keep that in mind. Then the video tells them to go down, guys, down the hill. The video turns off, the affidavit says. So later on, the police are investigating this scene, and we didn't know this before either, but between the two girls, they found an unspent .40 caliber handgun round. So this is a dummy round of 9mm. I'm not going to have any .40 caliber here because .40 caliber is dumb, but I'll use 9mm. .40 is just a slightly larger and more powerful cartridge than 9mm, but we'll talk about it a little bit because the round they found on the ground was not fired. They didn't mention any casings from fired rounds or any recovered bullets, just this one round that was not fired, and that it was in .40 caliber. And .40 caliber is not as popular as 9mm. You don't see it around as much. So then the police say that they executed a search warrant on Richard Allen's house, and at least one of the items they recovered there was a .40 caliber handgun that he owned. They performed tests on it at their laboratory, and they determined or decided that the round that they found on the scene was cycled through his firearm. So just before his arrest, the police had Allen down to the station and asked him, listen, hey, any reason why one of your bullets, one of your rounds would be something that had been through your handgun would have been found down here at the scene of this crime? And he says no. He said he hadn't been on that property. He didn't loan this gun out to anybody. So he had no explanation for how a round, if it existed, would have been through his firearm and then found down at the scene. And so then, of course, he gets arrested. To me, a major part of the probable cause affidavit is the section where they say that the examiner decided that the round that they found had been cycled through Richard Allen's handgun. It hadn't been shot, so how did he decide that? He said that the extractor marks matched on it. Now, a lot of times they'll match bullets because a bullet gets fired through a barrel. That one's greasy. This is a Sig 226 barrel, and this is the kind of gun that he had, a Sig 226. His was .40 caliber. This is 9mm, but the bullet would go through this barrel where it has rifling in it. And the bullet is slightly larger than the inner diameter of the barrel so that it can be spun. And so it has marks made on it as it travels through the barrel. The idea is that barrels make individual marks because every barrel has some kind of machining or wear difference to it or whatever. And if you can recover the bullet and there's enough evidence left on it, you can tell which firearm fired this bullet. That's the idea. No mention of that here. And so that makes me think that this gun was not used in the murder. I don't know if a gun was used in the murder or not, but hey, probably not. But no mention of any .40 caliber actual bullets being tested, just the casing. Now, it wasn't a spent casing. In other words, there wasn't a round fired, and they recovered just the brass casing that holds the gunpowder and the bullet and stuff. That they found a whole entire unfired round on the ground. And they said that it had extractor marks on it from his firearm. So what does that mean? So if you put a bullet or round into the barrel like this, right? That's what it looks like. These are all fake bullets. There's nothing real going to happen here. All real ammunition is gone. So I got a round in the chamber. Again, it's not real, right? What if I want to get it out without shooting it? I got to get it out of here. So what happens is the extractor grabs the round, okay, and pulls it out of the chamber. And then when it gets back far enough, there's a little piece of metal called an ejector that then pokes it out. So when you fire a round, you could have marks on a bullet that could be tied to a gun. You could have extractor marks tied to a gun, and you could have ejector marks tied to the gun. In this case, they only cited the extractor marks. And the extractor is in the slide, and it's this little claw. So when the round gets slammed into the chamber, there's a little claw that sits in there. And so when you need to pull it out, or the gun's going to pull it out if you fire it, that claw will pull it out until it hits the ejector, which then knocks it out of the gun. So it's a little claw. And if that little claw has individual machine marks on it or things like that, tiny to be seen by a microscope, you can match it potentially up to the extractor. So this is a slide for this 226. Here's another 226. In theory, this expert, if I put a round in one and not the other, could tell us which one it had been cycled through, right? So what does that mean? Why did that happen? So that bullet was cycled through somebody's gun because it has extractor marks on it. It comes from the factory without extractor marks. It was cycled through somebody's gun. The examiner says it was cycled through Allen's gun. Unless he had a round in his pocket, right, that he dropped out there that he previously had in the gun, for some reason at that crime scene, he was racking the firearm. And I don't know whether he was clearing the gun, maybe taking the magazine out and then getting the round out. I mean, that's what I do when I want to unload it, right? You just saw it fly out of there when the extractor pulled it back and the ejector knocked it out. If you wanted to intimidate somebody, then you might also, like that, and if you'd already had a round in the gun, then one would come flying out. But for some reason, this gun was racked at the scene. Not fired necessarily, there's no indication of that, but racked at the scene, and a bullet comes out. Either that, or he had previously racked this round through it, maybe had it in his pocket or something and dropped this individual round out. That doesn't make any sense to me. You don't carry normally bullets around in your pocket by themselves. You would have them in a magazine. So my feeling is, for some reason, whoever had a gun there, whether it was Allen or someone else, racked that gun there, and then the bullet came out at that point. I don't know why. That doesn't make any sense to me why that would have been done. Again, it could have been to intimidate or to clear the gun, but if you just murdered two people, why would you want to clear your gun? Maybe you didn't want to have it for any other witnesses or whatever. I don't know. But that, to me, is the biggest piece of evidence that they revealed to have against him, which is a round of ammunition that has been through his gun, which he says he didn't loan out to anybody and that he had never had on that site before, found there, right next to, within a foot or two of one of the victims. And that's great stuff for a probable cause affidavit. Isn't enough, however, for a trial? I don't know. Because this type of matching and identification is subjective in nature. It is scientific, but the conclusions are still subjective. The examiner looks at it and even says in this probable cause affidavit, my conclusion that these match is subjective. So the closer you get down to try and identify which gun it is, the harder it can be. You have what's called class identifiers, and that can be the caliber, the diameter of the lands and grooves, the direction of rifling, something that would identify the class of firearm. Then a subclass characteristics, maybe the type and shape of something that was produced in a batch or something like that. And then individual characteristics. How do you tie this to a particular gun? How do you know that if you can say it was a Sig 226, how can you say it was this particular Sig 226? They stick it under a microscope and they run other rounds through it, and then they look at the marks that are made by the extractor and they start comparing them. And if it looks close enough to whatever their training and experience says is good enough, they're going to say that this came out of this gun. And we don't see in the pictures. We don't know what that looks like or how good that is or whatever. Don't know. But it is a subjective situation. And so depending on the quality of the expert and how persuasive that person is and how close the match is, if your extractor's screwed up and it has a really distinctive ding in it that no other extractor has, that may be a very, very good, a high probability that, hey, this is your gun because only your gun was messed up like this, right? And it's a little bit of an oddball caliber being a 40. That's not really crazy, but it's not as, you don't see it everywhere like you do 9mm. So I don't know. But it looks really bad for him. The expert says it came from your gun, and he can't explain how any other way that round would have got there. And he was the guy who was there that day by his own admission. So this does look terrible for him. I don't right now see how this is tying into anyone else, though, other than him. So that's the story on that. You know, that is evidence against him. It's not like a DNA evidence, though it is a subjective evaluation by an examiner who looks at, you know, the microscopic or whatever pictures of these cases and says, hey, the marks are close enough to the same that this is the gun that it came from. So you can imagine the defense in this case will hire another expert who will look at those and go, you can't really tell. You can't even tell if it was a Sig 226. You can't even tell this, or maybe you can tell it was a Sig 226, but you can't tell it was that Sig 226. There'll be a battle of the experts, I assume, and they'll need more evidence if they can get it. But read the probable cause affidavit. It's a pretty good narrative of why they think it was him. It's not a beyond a reasonable doubt narrative, as I say. It's a probable cause affidavit, and that's what's in it so far. So it's not nothing. It's not speculation. It's not he showed up on somebody's phone or borrowed an account or something. It's a piece of physical evidence found at the scene that they then tie to him through expert evaluation. If you don't think it's good enough, I understand that. But if you think it's nothing, then you're not watching this logically. It's subject to challenge, but it is a substantial issue for him, and his attorneys know that. I don't know what their narrative will be against it yet, but they'll have to come up with something because it definitely looks bad. One of the things that looks a little weird, though, is they're talking about his blue jacket, and I think they said he even still had his blue jacket at his house. So one of the witnesses said they saw a male leaving the area. He was bloody and he was muddy. So where did the clothes go and how did the car get cleaned and all that? Of course, this was all years ago, so who knows about any of that? I certainly don't know. If he did use this gun, the gun they say he used and kept it at his house and never changed anything out of it. Maybe he didn't think about the fact that round could be identified or forgot about it or whatever, but man, you should have sold that gun in another state or changed parts out on it or whatever. Or you can put different barrels in it and things, but I suppose he didn't do any of that and they found this gun and they feel like that is the exact same gun that was used in the crime. So to go over it again a little bit, round goes into the chamber, right? The extractor will grab it and pull it back like that. And then it will hit the ejector, which is on the frame, and the ejector will knock it out of the gun. And then, you know, it scoops up another one from the magazine if you still have it in it. That's how the gun works. And when you want to clear the gun, you just manually do that and it comes out. So that's the evidence against him. How it would be proved in court is through an expert who compared these things. I think that's the strongest evidence so far. They could have more, I don't know. And they can have more involving other people. It's interesting that they say there were other people involved because, again, unless I missed it in the PCA, I didn't see where that was implicated in the PCA. And I remember the defense attorney saying after the press conference, hey, we didn't see anything in the probable cause affidavit talking about other people. Well, I didn't see it either in the first two read-throughs I did of it real quick. Of course, I did hone in on the gun stuff because I know that better than other things, but I just didn't see it. So if you saw it, let me know in the comments. If you see something in there, you're like, hey, well, you missed this. This shows that there was another, whether it was Allen or not, it shows that there was more than one person involved in it. Now, they do believe it, and I'm not saying I doubt it, but I am saying that I'm not convinced that a firearm was used for the murders, or especially not the firearm they're talking about, because they would have used the bullets first for comparison, spent casings if there had been any. They didn't mention that the girls were murdered with this firearm, just that they found a spent shell casing there. And that, you know, kind of supports the felony murder that they say he was the guy in the video, that the girl said there was a gun, that a round from his gun was found at the murder scene, felony murder, even if they can't prove he's the guy who murdered them. Although, of course, they say they have a witness saying that somebody matches him, was leaving bloody and all that stuff. Doesn't look good for him. As you probably know, his attorneys asked for a change of venue. They want to move, I think, 100, 150 miles away and say the search criteria suggests they could get a better jury pool there. I can understand that. It's hard to believe that if you're in that community for this length of time, as many people as cared about this case, that people wouldn't have strong feelings about it and have already read a lot of things in the media and, you know, moving it a ways away to get a less tainted jury pool. That doesn't seem like an outrageous request. But their previous statement about how flimsy the affidavit was, I don't agree with that. Because of his own admission, he was there. They're not guessing at that. And then tying this to his gun, that looks like a pretty good probable cause affidavit to me. Again, that's not their final trial case. That's their probable cause affidavit. So I think it looks pretty good. You can disagree if you want to, and I understand that, and that's fine. And I'm not saying it's enough to convict him, okay? Because this is subject to attack. I don't know the quality of the expert, how close this match is, or anything else they may come up with. I just know that he was asked by the police, can you explain why a round that had been cycled through your handgun would be at the scene of this crime? And he said, nope, never loaned a gun out, and I've never been to that spot. So how does that add up? Then either the expert's wrong and it didn't come from that gun, or there's some bizarre thing we don't know about, or he's lying and he was on the bridge, as he said that day, in order to explain why people saw him there. He admitted that, and then he was involved in these murders and ran away, and he's trying to say that, well, I wasn't actually at the murder, I was just the male who was nearby at the murder. I don't know the answer to it, but they have finally put up some evidence of why this is the guy that they have in custody at this point, and it's not bad evidence for that. It doesn't necessarily make him guilty, but it's certainly enough to have him arrested, in my opinion, and also in the judge's opinion. So we will see what happens if they can move the case away and as other things proceed on this. I do hope that if he's the right guy, that they're able to deal with him, and if there was anyone else involved, they catch them too. Thanks, bye.